Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Walton Family Foundation, working to create access to opportunity for people and communities by tackling tough social and environmental problems. More information is at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. It's been quite a year. President Trump's second first year in office. From funding fights and DEI standoffs with elite universities, including Vanderbilt, pardons of Tennessee's former House Speaker, convicted of corruption charges, to the initial wave of immigration crackdowns that included Nashville, to this current moment when Tennessee's legislature aims to pilot state-based immigration laws at the behest of the White House. And now this morning, a new poll from Siena and the New York Times, more than half the country, 56%, disapprove of the president's job performance. That's the latest, with the majority saying the country is worse off than it was a year ago. And while roughly half of Americans approve of Trump's job on the U.S.-Mexico border, nearly two-thirds disapprove of how ICE and the tactics that it's using in cities around the country have gone, saying that they've gone too far. So that's kind of the backdrop for this community conversation here, and we welcome your calls throughout the hour. Which side of this new poll do you find yourself on? What's improved in the last year? What's worse off than it was a year ago? The number to join on air is 615-760-2000. You can also chime in on the video stream in the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN. Let me introduce our panel. Representing a spectrum of political views, Mike Floss is a hip-hop artist and co-founder of the Southern Movement Committee, which is a racial justice and human rights advocacy organization. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Thank you for having me on. It's good to be here.
Well, Chris Walker's a founding partner of the Poplar Group, former cabinet-level advisor to Republican Governor Bill Lee, also worked on communications for President Trump's re-election committee and the Republican National Committee. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And political science professor Ian Shapiro of Tennessee State University is back. Welcome.
Happy to be here before the storm gets us all.
Yes, well, I hope you can make it back to campus. If not, it's a short walk. So let's start with kind of the top line from this poll out with Siena and New York Times. Do we think that it's reflective of voters in Tennessee? Has approval slipped even among Republicans here, Chris?
Tennessee's probably more of an outlier in terms of the national mood than not. This is more conservative Republican state than, a swing state like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. I do think that there's a movement more leftward. We saw that with the Matt Van Epps-Afton Bean election late last year. It was about a 12-point swing from where it was November 24 to November of 25. So
you think that was indicative of a little left move even in Tennessee?
Oh yeah, I mean that election was closer than a lot of people expected it to be. In part because I think people are, a little uneasy with what they're seeing in the news. And that's something where there's a messaging issue to that, but there's also, people feel it, whether it's prices or other things. People are, there's been a consistency of opinion that Americans are just upset in general. And nothing has seemed to really kind of abate that. So whoever's in power tends to kind of be the brunt of people's anger and ire, and I think that's happening to Republicans and President Trump right now.
Ian, what about you? Is it reflective of what's going on here, this poll, that there are even more people disapproving than approving of President Trump?
Sure. As I'm pulling apart some of the crosstabs here and looking at the specific issues and policy areas that are being talked about, you've got the economy and immigration, obviously, but then more recent things like Venezuela, and then some things that have maybe gone into the backdoor mirror, things like DOJ and managing the federal government. The consistency of the pattern is that for the items that the Trump administration has chosen to put on the agenda themselves, it seems like they are underwater. One of the more interesting aspects of this poll that pops out to me is how little ambiguity there is in people's responses. So people are allowed to say, I don't know, or I haven't heard of much on this issue. And those are really tiny percentages across all of these items. So not only is Trump underwater, but there's very few people found, at least in this poll, that haven't made up their mind about how he's doing as president so far.
You're saying on the issues that the Trump administration kind of has made issues themselves. What would an example of that be? Are we talking Venezuela?
So an example would be a lot of individuals tend to think of, do I like big government or small government?
Yeah.
And they have these pictures in their heads about, do the Democrats make government too big versus the Republicans are going to rein it in and I have to fill out less paperwork for my pizza company. They tend to have those pictures in their heads and they say Republicans will do a better job managing government, cutting waste and fraud. But that's a picture in their head is bumping up against the reality of what they're seeing on the news with, chaos of different emails being sent from different authority figures to the bureaucracy. And they're just not liking the chaos that they're seeing.
Yeah.
And that is reflected in a lot of these crosstabs.
Well, to listeners, what have you welcomed this year from the Trump administration, or what's leading to your own loss of approval in the president? Join us for this community conversation, 615-760-2000. We got a voicemail ahead of the show from a listener. Let's take a listen.
Hey, Blake. I just want to share that I never expected we would let it get this far. This second first term is not just a nightmare. It's confirmation that there's something deeply flawed in our American system that needs to be rooted out before we can progress historically.
Mike Floss with the Southern Movement Committee. I don't know, a nightmare. Do you sense that there's a large group of people who, maybe more people who are feeling that way than were feeling that way 1 year ago?
First off, I mean, this is a recurring nightmare. We're talking about living in the U.S. South. We're talking about a sharp rise in fascism. We're talking about global domination coming from the lens of white supremacy. This is not something where we should be talking about the polls are starting to slip a little bit left. That's unacceptable in my opinion. They should be swinging as far left as humanly possible because they're taking it so far right and so far into a place where people's lives are not safe, both domestically and abroad. This is not just a nightmare. This is something that America continues to repeat over and over again, and they're playing the same playbook they played in the Jim Crow South, and they're playing the same playbook that the Nazis learned from, which was the Jim Crow South, and they're doing it again in 2026.
I think a lot of people will hear that kind of comparison and think, and kind of be nodding along with you while also thinking, yeah, but it's not that bad, right?
I mean, we just watched from, 50 different angles, someone that is masked, that works for ICE, shoot someone who lives in the United States in Minneapolis, who had committed no crimes, who had done nothing wrong, get shot 3 times in her head. I think it is that bad. And this isn't the first attack we've seen on our community members in Minneapolis. In 2020, when the George Floyd uprisings were happening, we saw somebody kneel on a man's neck that was exercising the power granted to him by the state using a license to kill. This is not, is it that bad? This is, have we seen this before, and how did we fight our way out?
Mike Floss, a man who knows how to use his words. Well, I'm sort of sitting back in my chair here and trying to digest these points that you're making in a powerful way. How about you in listener land? We'd love to hear from you on the air today. The number is 615-760-2000. Let's go ahead to the phones. I think we've got a call coming in from Taos, New Mexico. Hope it's beautiful there today. Chad, you're on This Is Nashville. Go ahead.
It's very cold here, but it is beautiful. I fled Nashville. I lived there 22 years. I love it with all my heart. It's not the city I fell in love with anymore. I'm scared to be in Tennessee. I don't like it. There's an ick in my belly whenever I come back to see my family and friends.
What's the ick?
It's just the political nonsense. The Proud Boys marching in the street, all the conservative talking heads that have moved to Nashville or to Williamson County and call it Nashville, and just the way the city has moved towards this thing where there can be Nazis walking in the street and ICE moving around, operating and stealing our neighbors off the street without any kind of oversight. And then Governor Bill Lee, being on board with this whole thing. People who are surprised by Trump and what they're doing, what he is doing and what those people are doing, is just disheartening to me because he telegraphed everything that he wanted to do. He's been going on Letterman as a guest for decades, since the 80s, and he's always been a sham artist with a new scam. He's a liar, he's a buffoon, and we all make fun of him. And anybody who has any other idea of who Trump is ludicrous to me. But then he's telegraphed everything he's wanted to do. I thought day one of his first presidency he'd be rounding up brown people in the street and haul them off because that's who he is. And these people told us everything they wanted to do in the Project 2025 document that not enough people read. But like this whole, like your guest has said, this neo-Nazi agenda they have for like they telegraph it and they say it's a joke and everybody laughs, but it's not a joke. He's just telegraphing what he's going to do. And then this dementia patient with a load in his pants is running around doing all these things.
Chad,
and it's not surprising to me at all. It's just disheartening and it's very scary.
Chad, appreciate the call. We certainly take your point, and let me actually, take this over here to Chris. I mean, you worked for Governor Bill Lee, and Chad's saying, well, Governor Bill Lee is sort of going along with this. I sense his unease at time, but kind of having to kind of walk the line. What do you say for the governor here?
Well, I don't speak for him, so I'll let him and his administration talk about it now. I can speak for myself. I would say one thing, just listening to the conversation so far, it feels very, there's a side to this where I can understand the passion, but I also think conversations like this need to be had. But there's been a lot of elevated rhetoric. I've heard the word Nazi thrown around 3 times already. I don't think that's helpful because ultimately that's not necessarily, the facts on the ground. We're seeing, this state is still prosperous. There's a lot going on here. There's freedom to speak here on the radio. There's freedoms of opportunity here. So I wouldn't say that we're dreading towards fascism. I would say that we're having a conservative administration, probably making some folks who aren't on the conservative side uncomfortable. But, from our perspective, we felt that way during Biden's administration too. I mean, we had a DOJ that was putting their political opponents in jail. And so from a standpoint of thinking about the other side of the coin, I would argue that this is not as equivalent to that.
Yeah. Political opponents in jail. I was trying to think of an example of that, not to put you on the spot.
They prosecuted President Trump several times. They, put people who were protesting abortion clinics, in jail. There's just a lot of political prosecution from the DOJ that, to me, was lawfare. And from that perspective, I think that put a lot of people at unease. And so we're seeing the reaction to that now. The temperature needs to be lowered. I think across the board would be very helpful as we try to get to the right place. Democracy is hard. The sausage making is hard. But amplified rhetoric doesn't help it. We've got to figure out how to talk to each other in a meaningful and productive way.
Mike, thoughts about folks who would say, it's not constructive here. Blowing a whistle while ICE is trying to do their job on the streets of Minneapolis, not helpful. That kind of a thing. I don't know. Is this the time? How do you feel?
Yo, we passed that. Okay, so we talking about rhetoric not being helpful when people are dying. Right, we're talking about a war and billions upon billions of dollars being sent to Israel to bomb Palestinians, and we're talking about rhetoric. This is not about rhetoric. This is about the lived experiences of people who are shedding blood in the street, literally. So we don't care about not having productive rhetoric or whatever it may be. It's over for sweet talk. It's over for being cute with each other. The difficult thing for a lot of people who are conservative Republicans to understand is that you stand on the side of white supremacy. You stand on the side of racist legislation. You stand on the side of making the 1% richer and the 99% have the most difficult time they can possibly have. And that's hard to swallow. So when you don't want to swallow it, you pinpoint the language.
It's
but
not
what's
hard to swallow.
actually
It's
happening, I'm talking right now, what's actually happening is people are living in hell on earth, and we're worried about the words instead of worrying about how do we shift that reality.
Chris, you want to respond?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't appreciate being labeled things that I'm not. That's not helpful or productive. Again, we're trying to live in a society here, and talking about racial motivation on things is not accurate. But irrespective of that, we have tremendous prosperity in this country.
Why?
Capitalism and has led to we're the most free society that we've ever had in the history of the world, in part because of capitalism and the ability of people to choose their own path. And so while it's not perfect,
Who gets to choose their own path?
everyone, you get to do what you want to do.
No, I don't.
We all get to do what we want to do.
No, I don't.
Well, you've chosen your career.
Historically, that has not been the case. Historically, what has happened is communities have been redlined. Historically, what has happened is the economic center of black communities has been destroyed and decimated, which prevents that choices that you have access to. No, I have not been able to choose my path. I've had to fight for a path that I have had to pave with my own hands. I have not been able to choose. I've been able to fight back against what's been trying to stop me. That is a very different concept.
Hey, Ian, can you step in here, and then I want to ask a question on Mike?
Yeah, I'm just something I think that's fascinating about the last year is, we listen to politics and elites, and they have their rhetoric on this issue and that issue. But for a lot of things like what's going on in Minnesota, you don't need rhetoric. We can just look at the facts on the ground. There's unmarked vans with individuals who are armed, who aren't presenting their IDs, and they're masked, and sometimes they're taking people off the streets. And, we're getting violations of Fourth Amendment protections, of search and seizure laws. We're getting notifications that, organizations and higher-ups in ICE are saying you don't need a judicial warrant in order to go into someone's house as long as they look suspicious in some way, shape, or form. These are plain-to-see documents, plain-to-see actions. And so while it would be nice to bring down whatever rhetoric and not, go to ad hominem attacks, sometimes you have to call a spade a spade. If I could just say one more thing, another kind of not against a person, but against the administration, you've heard a lot of words like authoritarianism and fascism getting thrown around, sometimes mixed up, sometimes interchangeably. But when we look at the pure academic definition of these things, right, it's about control, it's about centralization of power, and it's about the wielding of that power either within government or, when it comes to fascism, among the other institutions and organizations of adult life, like universities, which I know we'll kind of talk about later today. And the bustling down of law firms. So you can take all these individual instances and kind of apply a certain term or say, here's the rhetoric that goes here. But at the end of the day, you can take the amalgam of these things, throw it into the American public over a year, and see 20-point changes in people's approval of what's happening. And that's just not great.
Mike, you were talking about, people in the black community and how much they've been disenfranchised over time, and you've made strong points, and yet you heard a surprising number of people, I think, to a lot of folks, that you saw black and brown communities, parts of them supporting President Trump. What are you surprised by that?
I think I'm not surprised, because when you systemically alter the way people are educated, then of course they're going to operate the way you want them to operate. This is about control, right? If you hold the levers of how people perceive the world around them with the news media, then yes, they're going to be swayed. Yeah,
I'm thinking of a guy I'm friends with. He's in Memphis now. Has been unhoused for a lot of his adult life after getting out of prison, a black man. And he... I was talking to him and I was asking him about ICE in Memphis. He's like, "Yeah, I'm glad they're doing something about this." Had a positive thing to say about it. To my surprise, what explains that?
Many things can explain that, but I think the larger point is that it's not about one individual person's experience. It's about the collective experience, and how we can democratize processes so that we can contribute all of those lived experience to have a larger view, right? And once we do that, then we can do things like have people's movement assemblies, which the Southern Movement Committee does, where we can identify issues, solutions, and action steps to those things, and then take steps to change what those realities are for the people that are suffering.
Well, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back. A couple folks on the phones. Please hang on. I'll get straight back to you when we come back. It's our Roundabout panel looking at the first year of the Trump administration. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, helping donors make more possible through the power of community giving. More at cfmt.org. And Wildwood Resort, an all-inclusive destination for executive retreats and team gatherings near Nashville on Cordell Hall Lake, with meeting spaces, waterfront lodging, and modern amenities. More at visitwildwood.com. And Barnes & Thornburg, advising corporations, healthcare companies, and more. A nationwide law firm offering locally tailored legal solutions for complex business needs. Barnes & Thornburg, change is relentless, so are we. btlaw.com.
Nashville Public Radio provides a number of audio services. This one, of course, that you're listening to now, WPLN News at 90.3 FM. If you have an HD radio, most newer cars do, you can also listen to classical music on 90.3 HD2 and WPLN International News on 90.3 HD3. Plus, we have a new music discovery station at 91.1 FM WNXP. More about all of our channels and how to listen at WPLN.org.
I'm Blake Farmer. This is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. We're doing what we can to assess President Trump's second first year. It's been wall-to-wall immigration in recent weeks, as was our first segment there. But there have been many more direct impacts in Tennessee. We're going to talk a little bit about higher ed in a moment. Also want to start with the pardoning of former House Speaker Glenn Cassida and his aide, Cade Cothran. Our panel includes Mike Floss of the Southern Movement Committee, Professor Ian Shapiro of TSU, and Chris Walker, former senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee and a communications consultant for the Trump Reelection Committee. Chris, I wonder, how did the pardons in Tennessee fly with Republicans here?
I don't know many people who are defending them. It's a difficult situation there. It's hard to wrap your head around it sometimes. There's just some interesting choices that are made that just seem difficult with a nonpartisan lens to see the logic in it. In that case, I don't get it. I just don't. I don't think anything of that was necessarily useful, and to me, I don't think it was a good decision. Yeah. At the end of the day, the president seems willing to use that pardon power very liberally and aggressively, and that's one of the things that kind of came on an outcome of that. But it's odd to me to see some of these things that are happening on the pardon level, and it's something I think that the country needs to be thinking about on a larger level. What does the pardon power actually do, and do there need to be limits to it over time? Yeah. It was a different situation, in the 1700s when this was created, and it was talking more about like sedition and folks who were kind of coming into the new country. Now it's like a carte blanche for all federal law, which we have like 30 different titles of law of federal law now. It's just a different time. So what are those limits, and how does that impact, in the future? I think that's a discussion that needs to be had and being looked at overall. It's just a different time now. But,
you talked about being hard to defend. And yeah, I think every, the top leaders, Republican leaders of the state seem to have trouble defending them if they even, most didn't try. But not exactly calling out the president, whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. Do you expect that? Are you surprised that didn't happen?
Surprised that
calling out the instead of sort of, I'm not defending it, to sort of say this was the wrong decision.
Well, he has a iron grip on the GOP right now. So if you're in politics, you're sometimes not necessarily free to speak your mind as you would want. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. Yeah. I just think you're not gonna see a lot of political courage right now on some of that. It's just the way it is. Politically, people aren't gonna get out there and do that.
Well, what do political pardons signal to you as a listener? We'd love for you to join us on the air, 615-760-2000, or you can chime in at youtube.com/@WPLN. There's a chat there by the video stream. Sarah, you may be taking us back for a second, but I want to get to your phone call. Sarah, you're on This Is Nashville. Go ahead.
Hi. I just want to say, regardless of whether the decisions of Donald Trump are correct or incorrect, depending on who you talk to, I think what people are most unhappy about is the instability. It feels unstable. It's like one day he says something, the next day he says something else, then he says a third thing. And it's always like changing. And it's perpetually like, it always seems like there's a new crisis, according to him. And it's just like, it's when your parent, it's like if you're a child and your parents are you. You know what I'm saying? You just feel uncertain and you feel unsafe and you feel unstable. And I don't understand that at all. To be honest.
Well, Sarah, you're certainly getting nods in this room, including from Chris. Ian, can you help us out here, though, on stability, kind of regardless of people's political feelings?
In graduate school, I had the privilege of having a lot of discussions with people who did studying outside of the American context. And when people are talking about institutions and government in a comparative perspective, they always use the buzzword rule of law, as opposed to particularism or just the whims of a king or a monarch. And that's one of the ways that we separate, democracies versus non-democracies. And I think what Sarah might be hitting on is this kind of unease feeling or ick that we get when we perceive this dissonance between I was told I live in a democracy where people are supposed to follow the rules, and that provides some level of stability and keeps the chaos out from society, which of course allows us to be happy, prosper, grow, live the good life, all the political theorists talk. But then when you see Trump on a day-to-day basis changing kind of what the direction of the country is, kind of being mealy-mouthed with his words, saying one thing, and then the press being directed to what prepared statements were, even though they were inconsistent with the things he said in public, you begin to question who's driving the bus. And that definitely does not feel like a country that's going to reward consistent behavior and punish bad behavior. It means I'm just kind of at the whim of whatever the ruler wants and says on a particular day. That's upsetting.
Well, Chris Walker, you were nodding along there on the inconsistency, the kind of not sure what to expect one day to the next. I mean, are Republicans getting tired of having to defend that,
It's tough. I mean, people want stability. Markets want stability. People want to have faith in their decision making. They want to know what's going to happen the next day. And I think part of it isn't necessarily all the effect of the president as much as it is we have a social media addiction in this country where algorithms are feeding very cultured content that's, driven purposefully to try to get your engagement and get you riled up. And so it's not even necessarily the president himself, which he's contributing to, but I think there's an information overload that's happening for people right now that isn't just about one person in one office, but about the total encapsulation of news and international information coming on a daily basis. I think it's a lot for people to take in, and we're seeing that the context of that coming out with people just saying, "I just want some normalcy and some stability," and it's hard to do when you have this amplification in your inbox or in your television every day. It's tough, and I think that's part of it as well.
Well, let's step over to a new issue, though. Happy to come back to this if callers would like to. The number 615-760-2000. But with all that's happened in recent months, it's almost hard to remember that one of the big blowups kind of out of the gate was with elite universities, including Vanderbilt, where essentially you kind of needed to have DEI sort of wiped out at these big time universities, or there were financial implications. Mike, from folks who really prize diversity, equity, and inclusion, like the Southern Movement Committee, I mean, what kind of ripple effects have you seen from the administration's DEI crackdown at these big-time universities?
Yeah, we're talking about, and it's also connected to that instability because for our people these black women all over the country who have lost their jobs en masse, who are highly qualified, highly educated individuals and not able to find relevant work.
Sorry, are you talking about people who they sort of oversaw some of these programs?
Who were a part of these programs, who worked in these departments, who helped develop the curriculum for some of these things. These people have been facing instability as well as, we're talking about $1 trillion in SNAP cuts and Medicaid cuts and things like that, where it's like, I don't have anything to fall back on in these times of extreme instability where these jobs are being cut.
And it's amazing the rise of DEI. Well, in some ways, I obviously overdue in a lot of people's view. But have you seen it kind of ripple out beyond just those universities?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's also been a ripple effect of people having to alter and shift language, right? Where they have to say, okay, well, maybe this isn't diversity, equity, inclusion. We'll call it something else to try to avoid some of what the state of Tennessee and what the federal government has been working together on to snuff out. I mean, a lot of people have been shifting their strategies. People have been shifting their tactics to be able to survive in this time, because you cannot say what you want to say. You cannot call the thing exactly what it is, and you can't have any historical context inform your present day decisions without it being trying to be course corrected towards something that's not useful for your life.
Yeah. Chris, is the Republican Party now anti-DEI?
I think I think so. In part because it's a well-intentioned situation, but has probably led to more division than not. And again, I know we're disagreeing a little bit on conversation piece, and I respect what you're saying. And I think it's true. There's a lot of hurt out there. But if the goal is to try to unify, that it's kind of had the opposite effect, I think, for a lot of people. And so I think there's that resistance to it because it's not leading to better outcomes.
Is it
possible to do that we should talk about and figure out how to do that? But it's actually, there's been study after study that shows, generally speaking, it's led to worse outcomes in terms of like racial relations than not. How do we improve that and find ways that we, improve that for everybody? And I think that's something that that pushback's for. It's not agreed upon overall, but that's what I think some of the impetus is why that's happening.
Yeah.
You think the goal is to unify, to cut DEI? The goal was to unify?
I think, well, I don't know the goal specifically on some of that stuff. The point from public policy is to try to have a country where we all get together and make life better for the people that live here.
You talking about the concept of public policy or the way the Republican Party is wielding public policy?
I mean, my sense, good-intentioned people can have disagreements on how to get there, but the goal should be the same. How do we improve the lives of everybody in our country? And if there are different ways to get there, so be it. But when you see something that's actually heading to a worse outcome, what do you do about that? And is there a way to make it better? I think that's part of the impetus for it. It can look, problematic, and you have a much different lived experience than I do, and I respect that, and I want to hear what you say about that. But I do see from another side, sometimes these things get to be the only thing rather than a piece to getting to a better place.
If you'd like to chime in on this and the crackdown with DEI, the number is 615-760-2000. You can also join the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN, where we're streaming video. Mike, I want to come back to you, but Ian, will you set this up? I mean, do we know how voters feel about the crackdown on DEI?
So it's hard to separate people's views on like DEI and the principles underneath it from kind of, not to bring us back to rhetoric, but kind of the rhetoric and like the elite focus on framing it as kind of a negative thing, a thing for the other and not for all of us. The kind way to think about DEI initiatives is very much, thinking of things like the contact hypothesis. So like people come from different experiences. We may not have built-in trust with people who don't necessarily look like us, so we don't think that they have the same interests as us. And so you got to get people together to, expel those illusions or myths that we have in our mind about one another. And that is one of the effects of DEI. It's putting people into positions that they might not otherwise have opportunities for. I kind of want to get up on a really small soapbox, if I could, for just a second. But like this focus on DEI, especially in higher education, and to the extent that DEI is, quote, inconsistent with administration priorities and does not advance American interests or values. We've kind of seen that boilerplate language.
And that's a quote from what? From the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's a quote from the Trump administration. It's what they tend to write about when they say this kind of research is no longer being funded. It's part of their rationale for why funding is either being withheld or taken back from universities. My own research is specifically on misinformation and how that impacts or is tied together or interacts with people's racial perceptions. So I have a paper that came out last year with a co-author, Dr. Kevin Morris, where we looked at perceptions of fraud in the 2020 election. And we showed that misinformation narrative was tightly intertwined with people's racial stereotypes. But we also saw that those stereotypes diminished, and we saw that belief in fraud was much smaller among people who didn't hold any kind of negative antipathetic racial attitudes, and which is something that can come about from contact with other groups. So like the stuff I'm studying is kind of being downplayed, but more holistically, like in the workplace and in places of higher education where like DEI initiatives were being put in place, it's really just going to make it harder for us to trust each other and build the ties that bind outside of the immediate families that we're born into.
Got a few calls coming in on this, but Mike, can you help? What have you seen in terms of like the benefits of these focused, concerted efforts, by institutions to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I think it's really important because, I'll give you a personal firsthand experience. At
Please.
the Southern Movement Committee, we have a youth assembly where we train the future community organizers and develop their leadership. What they're telling us is that they're not getting any Black history teaching in school. They're telling us that they're not being able to find themselves in the history of this country in a way that makes sense to them, right? And a lot of times this is even an overcorrection beyond what's being demanded by policy, where people are afraid to do anything in that direction because they have to protect themselves. They're worried about their health care. They're worried about their jobs, and they need that job to stay there. So based upon who is in alignment with this administration and who holds power over them and whether they have employment, they have to walk that line very finely. And what's happening is shifting the education of teenagers, right? And these are the same people who engage in the political process in Nashville to shift the local budget by millions of dollars and are not old enough to vote yet. These are young people experiencing extreme attacks, and they're figuring out how to stand up and do something about it.
The overcorrection is a good point, that people are trying so hard to avoid anything that looks like DEI that they might stop teaching Black history, basically.
No, in many ways they have, and fortunately we're able to stand in that gap. But we don't have the scale that that the education budget at large has in Tennessee.
Let's take a couple of calls on this. Steve in Nashville, you're on. This is Nashville. Go ahead.
I remember that in 2015 we were told by the sociologists that the United States was entering into a long-term labor shortage, and my sense was that DEI came about and was expanded by a lot of companies because they were looking for workers. And this was a way to expand their worker pool.
Yeah, I don't know that history is something I know a whole lot about. I'm looking around the room here. If there's a lot of we're not so sure that we know the same thing you know, Steve. But we'll check on that and get back to you. But long-term labor shortage. Certainly something that might be discussed over time. Steve, really appreciate the call. We'll take another call here. Jerry, calling from Nashville. You're on This is Nashville. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm calling. The reason that I'm listening to this conversation, to me, makes no sense to me.
Okay.
I have seen this government being dismantled. Everything that they have dismantled was put there for a specific reason. I'm 76 years old, and I'm an African American, and I've been in Nashville all my life. So I can tell you about the DEI and all of the programs that he has dismantled. And the Department of Education was just, it is ridiculous.
When you say dismantling, is there one thing that you're sort of thinking of, like this thing has been taken away? I knew why we put that there.
The Department of Education reaches so far.
Yeah.
And that department was dismantled. So many African Americans lost their jobs just within that department alone. Not including a lot of other things that were dismantled.
Jerry, appreciate your call. Chris, I think all of this gets to kind of this overcorrection concept. Do you see it as potentially an overcorrection that the GOP might regret?
No, because I think one, the president campaigned on it and won. So I think that's part one. And there are things, change is hard, right? But we've seen, again, I think outcomes with the federalization of the Department of Education, I think we've seen education actually get worse. Well,
a lot of people pointed to, what President Bush did as sort of making sure states like even Tennessee were being honest about, their test scores.
Outcomes, that's right. I think, as a small C conservative, I feel, it's important that, and I've learned this a lot from the state side of it as well, the best government is the one that's closest to the people. We can sit here and talk about President Trump here, but none of us know him.
Yep.
But we do know our mayor and our city council members and others. And I think the more that we can push stuff away from Washington into the local level, I think those jobs return to a local community where they know them. We talked about ICE earlier. I think part of the problem with ICE is that they're in a community that they don't know.
You're talking about Minneapolis.
Yeah. And so, a federalization of law enforcement in of itself is almost an oxymoron because you're policing a community that you don't even know the people that are there. I'd rather have colleagues and friends that I know that I can call that have the responsibility for policing than some unaccountable bureaucracy in Washington.
Well, but
I think the same
Governor
applies to the
Lee
Department of Education.
Governor Lee's got it going on in Memphis right now. I mean, was he just sort of in there? There was no stopping it, so you just go along?
Well, I mean, I think if there's an effort to try to curb crime, and if there's resources that can come to do that, that's what he's trying to do. There was an issue in marriage.
Mike, go ahead.
I think it's a few things here, right? So I'm saying, I don't know if overcorrection is the correct word, if the thing that was happening in the first place wasn't even right to begin with. I want to name that first. But also, I think this concept of wanting to curb crime is kind of false. It's not actually true. If you actually wanted to curb crime, you would make sure that people had gainful employment. You would make sure that people had good health care. You would make sure that neighborhoods and schools were fully resourced. You would make sure that people had great educations. These are the things that actually prevent people having to do harm, because you reduce the desperation, you reduce having to be in survival mode, then you can actually have different access to different choices. So trying to deploy militarization in Memphis is not about reducing crime. It's about control. This whole thing, when people keep saying this word authoritarianism, is largely about control, right? And the control is in the self-interest of the people who sit at the top, whether you have working class people who go to these factories, who go to these jobs that really don't pay enough, where you have to have 2 and 3 jobs in the side hustle just to get by. That's the thing that you have to correct, right? So if you actually care about crime, if you actually care about making these things shift, then the steps that you take to achieve that will look very differently. And I think they're showing us that that's not what this is about.
I actually agree. I think education's a huge point. Sorry, Ian. But I think we have a bridge here. Education's an important thing to do in a community. You have to educate the citizens, and that's an important part of all of this. And so I think you're exactly right. The community needs to have faith in the people that are teaching our kids, and the community needs to be a part of that. That community first is a conservative idea in a way, ironically. Having local control and local ideas on it. Now, granted, we have a federal issue in Memphis that's coming in part because of an extra layer, and I hear what you're saying on that, but. You're right. The fundamental building blocks of a safer society is education and creating an environment where people can thrive.
Ian.
Sorry,
yeah,
Ian.
Just a short note on the nature of public opinion and what people are voting for, and then the policy outcomes that we get. You heard a lot of the word mandate following the election. Okay, there was an election, rhetoric and campaigns happened, the people voted, Donald Trump won, now he has a mandate to lead, et cetera, et cetera. We do know from the political science literature using exit polling that for the most part, the things people say about why they voted for a particular candidate tend to be rationalizations and not reasons. They're the things that were top of mind, the thing they saw on the television when they were eating their cereal that morning. You can go to the political scientist Julia Azari, who has some great thoughts on presidential power and what mandates actually mean, whether they are a myth or not. And then some empirical evidence from public opinion that, even if there was a mandate, maybe it indeed go too far, is this idea of thermostatic public opinion. People vote for a president, they move in one direction, and the public tends to say, well, I didn't want you to go that far. And then you get a reversion to the mean. That might be what we're talking about when we talk about backlash.
Yeah, that a mandate might be a little bit of a myth. Let's take one final break. We're going to keep taking your calls, but we'll need to get them quickly. So if you want to jump in on the conversation, the number is 615-760-2000, or time short. YouTube.com/@WPLN. Join the chat there. We'll work your comments into our convo. We're talking about Trump's first year and the view from Tennessee. We'll be right back. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com. And Alliance Bernstein, built on a culture of knowledge and innovation to help advance the financial success of their clients. AllianceBernstein.com. Alliance Bernstein is not affiliated with National Public Radio. WPLN's Vehicle Donation Program is supported in part by Zander Insurance.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Next time on The Middle, the U.S. has long been one of the world's leaders in scientific research, but the COVID pandemic brought that research front and center, and many Americans lost trust, opening the door to vaccine skepticism and research funding cuts. So what will it take to restore trust in science? We're taking your calls on a special episode in partnership with Science Friday next time on The Middle.
Tonight at 8 on 90.3 WPLN News.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. We're going to wrap up our Roundabout panel this hour, focusing a little bit on foreign policy and the view from Tennessee. Our panel does want to hear from you. What's the focus abroad? How does that level with Make America Great Again and America First? Join us at 615-760-2000. I'm with Chris Walker, former senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee, Ian Shapiro at TSU, and Mike Floss, hip-hop artist, co-founder of the Southern Movement Committee. Chris, maybe we start with you. I mean, Democrats are pretty quick to say the president's just trying to distract from something else at home when he's, let's just bombing Iran nuclear facilities, involvement in Israel, Ukraine, taking out the leader of Venezuela. Now we're talking Greenland. What do you see going on politically? Is there a through line?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm kind of sympathetic to the caller earlier who's saying that, instability seems to be the name of the game. It feels like there's a little bit of that going on. I think foreign policy is going to end up being what President Trump's going to see as his legacy, and I think he's trying to do everything he can to impact as much as he can in a short time that he's there. And so whether we see Venezuela or, the Greenland case is odd to me in a way because it wasn't in his national security document that he put together a couple months ago. It wasn't mentioned once. I think some of it is based on what's in the news or what he's reading on a day-to-day basis, and I think there's just some reactionary policy to that. But one thing we know about the president, he is an unapologetic America firster, and so that's different from kind of an international first perspective. And so, some people like it, some people don't, but the man is absolutely a cheerleader for the country as best as he sees it, and I think it's interesting to see how he works through all of these policy issues with that lens in mind.
Well, let's get to some phone calls because we don't have much time left, so we may have to keep it short. But Linda from Nashville, you're on the show. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to say that as a healthcare provider and married to a healthcare provider at Vanderbilt, I have to say that having people who are not experts in the field direct all of the new policies has been very distressing. And I'll start with the grant applications. My spouse had his grant applications canceled because his applications to help children and women who were vulnerable with epilepsy that wasn't being treated get services. Those were canceled because it was directed to women and children. And he had to eliminate women and children from his grant applications. And those are minority populations. They are underserved minority populations.
You're saying basically edited the grant application so it wasn't misconstrued as potentially somehow DEI or that kind of
Correct.
thing. Yeah.
Correct. The DEI. And then just watching the lack of experts directing our healthcare policy now has actually made me retire from my job because it's too depressing to see what's happening with our healthcare.
Wow.
That's all.
Well, that's a pretty big impact from the first year of the Trump administration. Really appreciate the phone call. Let's take one more. William in Clarksville, you're on This Is Nashville. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
Yes. I was just listening to your last segment about the ICE agents in certain cities, Minneapolis or whatever.
Yes.
They seem like they're leaving something out of that. It's been known, it's a fact that they're targeting Democratic cities. and it's almost like they're not acknowledging that there's crime in all the cities.
Well,
every state.
most cities are lean a little left, so there's that too.
Well, yes, that's true, but just because they're leaning left doesn't mean that those particular cities should be targeted.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in, Tennessee,
right.
And the major cities do lean left towards Democrats, but there are still crime going on in other states. Put it like that. I don't want to just break it down to cities, but in other states.
Right. Well, William, I hate to even say that because Clarksville, there's a city that doesn't lean too far left if it leans left at all. So you're right that they haven't sent folks to Clarksville just yet. Mike Floss, can you talk about the sort of targeting aspect? Is that how it feels to folks, to communities?
It's absolutely how it feels, and in many ways how it is. I think when you see the fear of people who are worried about this idea that an ICE agent can knock on your door while you're at home without cause, and you got to figure out how you're going to respond to that. When you see families being torn apart, when you see that, there may be people who have, questionable documentation or maybe even be U.S. citizens, if we're being real, having to face this, it feels targeted, and also it feels it feels like acts of terror. It feels like I cannot sleep peacefully in my own home because I don't know what's going to happen. And again, this isn't the first time we've seen this. We've seen this with Breonna Taylor. We've seen this during that time in 2020 when we were in the streets. And I think a big part of the reason why we're inviting people to join together is because of how targeted it is. We're inviting people to our summit at the end of the month to learn about these things, to learn about co-governance, to learn about other ways that we can do life together, and we can train and build skills so that we have access to other options.
Ian Shapiro?
Yeah, a lot of my thoughts on the ICE deployment are tied up in this idea of not necessarily where they're being deployed, right? Because there is a correlation between cities and that city being, managed by Democrats for the most part, but more just the complete throwing away into the wastebasket of like habeas corpus and people's Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights of due process and, protection from search and seizure. And it just seems like we're not applying the law, no matter for what reason that we're going into these cities. And, as Mike pointed out, it's affecting like citizens, non-citizens, and the entire communities.
Chris Walker, is that going to be difficult to defend over time?
I think the point of targeting is it's an interesting term, but I think it's also a reflection of the local and state leadership that are refusing to work with the federal government on dealing with the deportation issue. We didn't see this when President Obama was deporting people in his term because local and state law enforcement were working with him. There's a political recalcitrance towards working with President Trump and his administration on it. Fine. But what happens then is federal law enforcement is put in a position of enforcing the law rather than working with state and local as well. And so some of the targeting isn't necessarily a political target as much as it is the local leadership is being obstinate in terms of what their goal is trying to do. I do think at the end of the day we should be working with local and state as much as possible where we can.
Well, there's certainly more to say on that point, but this is where we must leave it. Thank you to Chris Walker, Republican strategist, TSU professor Ian Shapiro, and Mike Floss of the Southern Movement Committee. This Is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. If you missed yesterday's conversation, it was hot, maybe not this hot, but it was hot. A reality check on Nashville's real estate market. I'm still thinking about this caller from Inglewood who said he was committed to selling his house way below market value because he wants people to have the opportunity to join his community in East Nashville. So maybe look him up. You can listen on thisisnashville.org, the podcast feed, videos at the WPLN YouTube page. Today's episode produced lovingly by Mary Mancini, directed by Tasha A.F. Limley, Josh Deepin on the phones. Board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind that theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.
With the turning of the new year, you are ready to start fresh. How about becoming a new member of Nashville Public Radio? Start this year by starting your support of Nashville Public Radio and WPLN at WPLN.org.
Immigration enforcement is ramping up in Middle Tennessee.